Federal government extends 50% discount window for business registration in Nigeria by 3 months.
"75 political parties commend INEC for successful conduct of the 2019 general elections."
Nigeria adopts new e-border project to check human trafficking and security in the country.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall engage guests on sustaining economic growth, taking a look at the achievements of the government in the past 4 years down to the next level.
As the country prepares for the May 29 swearing-in of President Muhammadu Buhari for his second time in office, economic experts are predicting that the ongoing national recovery will gain momentum, mostly from improved consumer spending as the economy gradually stabilizes.
Well, that's right, Kirian. Now, with the election cycle over, the importance of the non-oil sectors in particular to strengthening Nigeria's economic growth is once again in focus. Real GDP is now projected to grow by 2.3% in 2019 and 2.4% in 2020 as the implementation of the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan gains pace.
Yes, of course, Kingsley. This is why many economic stakeholders have strongly refuted the statement made by the chairman, Governors Forum, and Governor of Zamfara State, Governor Abdullahi Yari, at the workshop for newly elected governors in Abuja. The Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, MAN, is one of many organized private sector groups that have questioned the basis for that statement when relevant international bodies have predicted that the Nigerian economy will keep growing at a steady pace.
Absolutely, Kyria. Now, the Buhari Media Organization has also weighed in, calling it a false alarm. That is to say, the alarm that the economy might slip once again into a recession. Now, the BMO outlined evidence of the federal government's policy direction to lift more Nigerians out of poverty, as well as the administration's social investment programs, which they said have touched some 13 million Nigerians across the country. Now, the BMO cited these and more reasons why the nation's economy is sure to continue on its path of growth.
Now, besides economic experts saying that Nigeria has already been through a recession and what the government should do next to take stock of the achievements over the past 4 years, particularly those policies that brought the country out of the 2015 recession, making the next level focus on ensuring Nigeria does not go through that again.
It's certainly very important there, Kyria. Now, the Central Bank of Nigeria has also come out to allay any lingering concerns about the economy, giving the assurance that the country is currently experiencing steady but marginal growth. Now, the CBN has a prediction that by the end of this year, 2019, the economy would have attained between 2.8 and 3% GDP growth rates. Well, Kyrian, some analysts are also calling for continuous economic reforms, while financial experts are advocating sustained, steady leadership to help the country on the path of sustainable economic growth.
Well, exactly. It turns out that both the IMF and the World Bank's economic growth prediction of 2.0% and 2.2% are lower than the government's budget forecast of 3.0%. Now, what does that mean for Nigeria's economic stability and development? How fast is the Nigerian economy growing, and at what rate? What are the most impactful economic achievements of the government in the past 4 years? These issues our guests will be reacting to very soon on GMN. That's Good Morning Nigeria today.
Absolutely, Kyria, and that's of course a principal item for discussion on the program this morning, in the course of which we shall also have our regular companion segments, and this will include newspaper review, business, sports, and foreign. My name is Kingsley Osadolo, and I welcome you to today's edition of the program being broadcast on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority.
Yeah, and I am Kirian Umayo, reaching you live on the network service of the NT, and of course, a broadcasting from the capital city of Abuja. Now, for a takeoff, now let's get what is in the news, and our guide is Usman Ali. Usman, good morning to you.
Good morning, Kirian and Kinsley, and good morning, Nigerians. Welcome to the morning news. Spurred by the successes recorded in the first 50% discount window for the registration of business in Nigeria, the federal government has directed the Corporate Affairs Commission to extend by 3 months the special window for MSMEs. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo gave their directive at the first quarter MSME stakeholder meeting held at the presidential villa. The special business name registration window of 50% discount was granted by the federal government through Corporate Affairs Commission to help to bring as many MSMEs to formalize their businesses. The Vice President also directed the Standards Organization of Nigeria and National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control (NAFDAC) to speedily harmonize issues relating to overlapping responsibilities for product registration. In the same vein, the Vice President Osinbajo directed relevant government agencies to speedily come up with better funding strategies for small businesses in the country. He said relevant agencies of government must ensure that loan beneficiaries are equipped with the necessary skills and knowledge to better manage their businesses. The Vice President urged regulators in the MSMEs to leverage technology to help build capacity for owners of small enterprises, as well as broaden the impact of their interventions. The Vice President solicited the support of relevant agencies for the shared facilities project for MSMEs, which has already commenced in different locations across the country. 75 political parties in Nigeria have passed a vote of confidence on the Independent National Electoral Commission for the successful conduct of 2019 general elections. These topped resolutions at the National Roundtable for 2019 general elections. The National Roundtable reviewed and released official report on the role of the Independent National Electoral Commission and other key election process stakeholders in Abuja.
Needs the support of critical stakeholders to deliver a free, fair, credible and violence-free election.
We must as stakeholders come together and sit down with the Commission to work out reforms that will further assist to create atmosphere for the conduct of a credible, freer and fairer election come 2023.
And away from politics, human existence may face great threat due to hunger unless government reviews upward climate financing to increase food production. This is the view of Technical Center for Agriculture and the Federal Ministry of Environment.
By 2030, if measures are not taken, the threat to food production, because climate change and climate uncertainties makes agriculture to become riskier, less attractive to the youth.
The agricultural productivity may be drastically reduced by up to about 25%.
The recently approved new e-border project is one of the pragmatic efforts being adopted to enhance security system in the country and check crimes such as human trafficking. Already the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons and Comptroller General of Nigeria Immigration Service are optimistic that the new technology for border patrol will dismantle trafficking syndicates.
The President approved $178 million e-border project for Nigerian immigration, which is almost 54 billion. The idea is to have a real command and control system at the border. It's not, you cannot man the borders physically with officers. Even if we put all the police officers and immigration officers together and custom, we cannot physically patrol, but technology is the answer.
And now, investment opportunities in Nigeria was a sub-theme at the Nigeria Diaspora Leadership Conference in New York. Correspondent reports that the conversation between the Executive Secretary of the Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission, Yewande Sadiku, and Nigerians in the USA was productive.
if there is one area where Nigeria needs to invest and where the diaspora can bring their technical capacity to bear, is water. The whole question of Nigeria depending on borehole is no longer sustainable.
Nigeria represents sterling opportunity. Youth translates to energy, translates to mobility, translates to accessibility.
The ECOWAS Commission for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, General Francis Bihanzin, has emphasized the need for integrated policies to mitigate the consequences of collateral impact of degradation of the maritime domain. This was during the Information and Coordination Meeting on Maritime Security organized by the Economic Community of West African States in collaboration with some of its component organs.
To harmonize our point of view of how to do for peace and security, how to do for agriculture, and Pescao. Pescao is a project financed by Union European.
The EU is determined to support the Yaoundé maritime architecture and improve maritime security and safety in the Gulf of Guinea.
Nigeria is taking the lead in the defense management and execution to mitigate the evolving security challenges in sub-Saharan Africa. This was illustrated in a lecture delivered by the Minister of Defense, Mansour Danali, to course 27 officers at the National Defense College, Abuja.
The fundamental pillars of defense management include policy formulation and implementation. To this end, the Defense Department in several countries consistently initiate new policy direction to maximize defense resources in bid to achieve defense objectives.
And that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kingsley and Kirin after this break. Stay with us.
There's a smarter way to live with Airtel Binge Plan, the ideal data plan for those heavy data moments. Get a 2 GB daily binge plan for 500 Naira. Dial *141# to activate. Live smarter with data.
Airtel, the smartphone network. NTA Television College Jos announces admissions into 2-year diploma programs in film and television production, television engineering, and broadcast journalism. The sale of forms will commence on the 13th of May and run through 30th July 2019. Admission forms can be obtained from all marketing offices, NTA state capital stations, zonal centers, or at the office of the academic secretary, NTA Television College, Rayfield, Jos.
On payment of a non-refundable fee of 7,500 Naira in bank draft in favor of NTA TV College. Applicants can also obtain the forms through the NTA TV College portal at www.ntatvc.edu.nj.
Applicants are required to possess 5 credits in GCE or SSCE in relevant areas of study in not more than 2 sittings, including English and mathematics. All properly completed forms attached with photocopies of credentials must be submitted on or before 30th July 2019. For further inquiries, please visit our website at ntatvc.com or call 0803-3144-383.
NTA TV College, training you to be the best you want to be.
Registrar, Announcer.
Son, being good at something requires strength. It requires pushing yourself. It requires putting in more. That's why the new improved Bornvita is packed with vitality and a great taste.
Nigerians. Suicide bombers are not spirits. They are not ghosts. They are human beings like you and me. They live amongst us. They are your neighbors. They are your friends today, but terrorists tomorrow. So you must know your neighbor now. Security begins with you and me. Know your neighbor. Be vigilant. Be security conscious. Report suspicious persons, objects, and movements to the police and other security agencies. The security of our nation is a duty for you and me.
If you see something, say something. Nigeria unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
All right, welcome back from that short break, and now it's time for us to take on some business stories with our correspondent Kunle Adeyeye.
Cotton and textile industry were the major drivers of more than 60% of Nigeria's economy 3 decades back, and Minister of Agriculture Audu Ogbe says the collapse of the industries contributed largely to the youth restiveness and other social vices and insecurity in the northern part of the country. The minister, who was speaking in Katsina at the flag-off of Presidential Initiative on Cotton, says President Muhammadu Buhari has directed that the industry be revived, starting with cotton production and milling. The Central Bank of Nigeria has included cotton production into the Anchor Borrowers Program, whereby cotton farmers and millers will access credit at single-digit interest rates.
Textiles in Kaduna, Kano, Ikeja, Aba disappeared, and we became a nation of importers of textiles. Today is here to begin a new launch of the BT cotton seed to give out to farmers. We believe that with this initiative, in a short while, we shall be back among the leading nations in textile production.
The intervention which we seek to undertake in the cotton, textile and garment sector beginning from today is holistic and it encompasses every node of the value chain.
Meanwhile, the President National Association of Nigerian Traders, Ken Ukoha, has called on Nigerian traders not to increase the prices of food commodities due to the increment in the national minimum wage. The president of the association said once a trader increases the price of a commodity, the seller will also increase the price of goods, and this negative cycle will only multiply poverty with ripple effect on the overall economy of the country, with further implications on everyone.
I want to call on and caution all our members nationwide to refrain from unnecessary price increase in commodities in view of the minimum wage increase.
And next is the graphic representation of Monday's tradings on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. With business news, I'm Kunle Adeyeye.
Kunle Adeyeye, we appreciate that business package. Now it's time for our newspaper review.
Our newspaper reviewer, Baya Tebe, is with us on the studios this morning. Baya, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Kinsley. Good morning. Good morning, Kirian.
Good morning, Baya, and welcome.
All right. We have 5 papers, I believe, yes, including one that has the editorial, which we shall take shortly. Let's begin with the Punch newspaper, and above the nameplate, right down to the foot of the paper. CBN to blacklist firms and individuals smuggling textiles. That's on page 25. Abducted copper, well, that's copper is the shortened form of core member. NYC contacts family and colleague says Boko Haram demands ransom. Details on page 13. Bandits killed 31 in fresh Zamfara attack. That's page 2. And on page 8, 2023, deal with overambitious APC members. El Rufai tells president. Now, the lead story says local governments can't withdraw more than 0.5 million naira cash daily from June. That's 500,000 naira daily from June. That's according to the Financial Intelligence Unit. Anti-corruption groups, Serap and Heather Hill Directive. Details of that story on page 28. Now, the photograph on the front page of the Punch there has a caption of some of the internally displaced persons in Guzo, Zamfara State on Monday, obviously displaced by the banditry in parts of the state. 2015 polls, I gave 10 million naira cash to Kwara CP, says Begore. And death of Unijust VC's son, a 200-level student, sparks controversy, pages 4 and 5. A court refuses to stop Buhari from swearing in Muhammad as CJN. That's on page 13. Kirian.
All right, let's turn to the leadership newspaper. Below the nameplate, Nigerians to get vehicle loans at 6% interest rate. And then it's on page 4 actually. All night clubs operating in Abuja illegal, says the FCTA. It's on page 6. Now the lead story on the leadership newspaper. CBN moves to halt $4 billion capital flight in textile sector with the 2 riders, flags of distribution of cotton seeds and others. Now to blacklist banks, others for aiding smuggling. And of course on the left-hand side of the photo picture here, 75 political parties seek assent to Electoral Act. And on the bottom of the newspaper we have PDP kicks as police arrests Adeleke on fresh charges on page 2. Prince Harry, Meghan's child, 7th in a succession line. It's on page 12. Nakano Assembly moves to create 4 new emirates. It's captured on page 6 of the leadership newspaper. And then CJN, court quashes motion against Tanko's confirmation. That's page 2. Let's bring in Bayo at this point.
Yes, the Nigeria Financial Intelligence Unit says that with effect from June, no local government will be allowed to withdraw cash exceeding 500,000. If the money must be withdrawn and it must exceed that, it has to be by valid checks or through electronic transfer. This is part of the measure that is put together by the NFIU to ensure that international money laundering measures are complied with. The new guideline has been sent to the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Economic and Financial Crime Commission, the ICPC, as well as chief executive of all banks and other financial institutions. Withdrawal of state joint account local government has been described as a basis for corruption for a long time. Talking about political parties, 75 political parties have advocated to INEC that 2023 general election should all be held in one day. The 75 political parties at a round table organized by the Center for Transparent Advocacy, CTA, says that this will address ongoing low voter turnout. It will also increase the zeal of the electorate for credible leadership. It will also cut costs and enhance the integrity of elections. The group also congratulated the Independent National Electoral Commission, particularly the chairman, and said he did well under the difficult circumstances it operated. The group blamed security agencies for alleged partisan and unprofessional deployments. They call for strengthening of the capacity of polling staff, and they call for the Electoral Offences Tribunal to try all electoral offences. The other measures that is advocated by the roundtable also call on the National Assembly to present the electoral bill amended to Mr. President for assent. Political parties were advised to maintain internal democracy so as to minimize incidents of defection. They said they should review their manifestos to strengthen their ideological standing and ensure loyalty to political parties. Meanwhile, the resident electoral commissioner for Kwara State, Garba Atairu, says he resisted pressure to compromise the 2019 election in Kwara State. The Sun reports that he said pressures were from highly placed politicians and some traditional rulers. He said he was tempted with huge sums of money, but he told them, I swear by the Quran that I will not sell my integrity for money. In doing an overview of his performance, he said 80% of cases before that are in court now are pre-election cases that has nothing to do with the election. Therefore, INEC has done very well. And he also says that the November 2018 by-election helped him considerably in managing the general election for Kwara State. And you recall that there was an article, a line that Kingsley read there about a commissioner of police receiving some sums of money during the 2015 general election.
That's a court case, actually. That's where the story is coming from. I think it's a significant development that the NFIU is coming out with this directive, to the extent that it doesn't hamper the smooth operations of local governments. To say that no local government can withdraw more than 500,000 naira cash every day, and then of course every day will mean 5 days in a week.
Yeah, we're talking every day. How many local governments are functional to the point of even withdrawing? Because from the
774 local governments.
From the setting, practically speaking, how many of them are functional in the sense of it as a third tier of government? That is what the issue is. Because of the joint account and all of that, who knows how they withdraw?
I think I see a way forward. Because of recent, there's been an amendment to eliminate that issue of the joint account, and therefore accord the local government some measure of autonomy. If that is to be the case, then it means that even the managing of the finances of the local government is now going to be subjected to monitoring. Since if you have to withdraw more than 500,000, it has to go by a process of electronic transfer, which can be traced from source to wherever it is.
Absolutely, or by valid checks.
Yes.
That's so that whoever is issuing the check and whoever is receiving it, there can be a trail of that. There's been very little attention in terms of corruption by the appropriate agencies on what is playing out at the local government level. So if local governments are under pressure from higher quarters, let them issue checks, and let them make electronic transfer, and at some point when the trail is identified, that whoever issued the directive and whoever also received it will be brought to account.
And you know that these days we have local governments, and of course we have development centers as well, all in the name of council area administration. There are states who have created development centers.
Lagos is one of them. I mean, those are quasi-local governments, because they're not following the challenges that they had, with formally creating the local governments against the provisions of Section 8 of the Constitution.
And how many states, have organized elections into the local government council? Well, some of them are by appointment.
Well, that's by caretaker. Whether by election or by caretaker, accountability is the key issue there. Kieran, I think we'll take other headlines from you. So let's take other headlines from the Sun.
Yes, okay. Sun newspaper, the Daily Sun newspaper, on the right-hand side of the nameplate, we have a London trip not for ministerial list, it says Buhari. It's on page 10. And the lead story, insecurity, Nigeria at risk, says Buratai, that's the army chief. It's on page 6. Now, warns against consequences of security challenges. And there are other stories there by the side of the photo story. The photo story there is actually, staff of the EFCC. They are actually trying to confiscate a particular building there. Is a part of the recovery of a public property. Okay, just by the side of that, we have Adeleke, PDP Goba candidate in Oshu, arrested to be arraigned in court over certificate. It's on page 4. Well, of course, we read that NFIU, that's the Nigeria Financial Intelligence Unit, tough on local government allocations, warns banks, others on access to council's fund, stops cash withdrawal exceeding 500,000 naira. Now below that we have court summons, federal government, Senate, NJC over Tanko, the acting CJN.
All right, let's go to the Nigerian Pilot newspaper. Nigerian Pilot newspaper, the lead story says CBN Governor Emefiele ruled out for second term. CBN Governor Emefiele ruled out for second term with 3 riders, failed to get Buhari's endorsement, accused of plunging the country economy into a recession. 3 names already penciled down as possible replacement. That's according to the Nigerian Pilot. Details of the story can be found on page 8. Below the photograph on the front page there, it says PDP protests arrests and detention of Senator Adeleke to be arraigned Tuesday in Abuja court. Details on page 6. And also below that you have a window of headlines. We'll take some of them. Ramadan, Zamfara distributes foods and clothes to 40,000 orphans. That's on page 6. Wike threatens communities with prevalence of cultism and kidnapping. That's page 10. And Fellowship ordains 48 inmates as evangelists in Jos Prison. Federal government to unveil national road safety strategy for 2019 to 2023, page 5. And on page 10, you have a recast of the headline we discussed already yesterday. 10 billion naira worth of poisonous pomo impounded in Lagos.
Yes, yesterday, Senator Adeleke, who was said to have been invited to the police headquarters, was said to have been detained. Punch reports that the first PRO has confirmed that he is in custody and is expected to be arraigned in court. Meanwhile, the People's Democratic Party has described the arrest as provocative and a recipe for crisis. Spokesman Kola Ologbondiyan says that he is to be arraigned over the same alleged examination malpractice and certificate saga that a very high court had actually ordered a stay of execution or a maintenance of a status quo. Talking about the court, so a federal high court in Abuja has declined an ex-party application to stop President Muhammadu Buhari from swearing in Justice Tanko Muhammad as Chief Justice of Nigeria. The application by Omiribu Foundation could not be conducted in the absence of the adverse parties. The court ruled that the 7 parties or defendants have to be served directly before the case can be contained, and therefore it has been given up to May 13th for the case to come out. It may be recalled that Justice Tanko Muhammad was sworn in as acting Chief Justice following the suspension of the former Chief Justice of Nigeria, and with the resignation of the former Chief Justice of Nigeria and his conviction, that position of Chief Justice has now become vacant. Asthma. The Nigerian Thoracic Society says it is requesting that asthma should, as a medication, should be placed on the National Health Insurance list. The president of the association, Professor Etete Peter, says one of the most common chronic lung diseases affecting 400 million people the world over is asthma. In Nigeria, as many as 15 million people suffer from this increased urbanization and a disease that has come up from Western lifestyle. He said asthma is the most common chronic disease in children too. Therefore, for the team of the 2019 World Asthma Day, the idea is to stop for asthma. STOP stands for symptoms and evaluation, T for tests and response, O for observe, assess and proceed to adjust, while T is for treatment. Asthma will affect 100 million people, they say, by 2025. Sometimes when they bandit some of these data around, it gets so alarmed.
Why, the source of the statistics, because they talk with certainty, some level of certainty that will get some of us confused about the reality, of what they're putting across to the world.
Ramadan is somehow tempering at least some of the virulent comments from the political parties. Issa Onilu of the All Progressive Congress has said that Nigerians are concerned over kidnapping, banditry, ethno-religious and resource fuel crisis. He urged Nigerians, Muslims and all others to pray for peace and security for the development of Nigeria. Also, spokesman for PDP, Ologbondiyan, urged Nigerians to use Ramadan to rededicate themselves to rekindling the virtues of love, selflessness, forgiveness, brotherliness in all affairs of people. Some of these spokespersons, they are sometimes very corrosive with their pronouncement, but this time around, they are all mellowing down. That's the temper of peace that is coming from Ramadan.
All right, let's turn to the editorial for today. Editorial is from the Daily Independent. It's actually on page 7 of Daily Independent. It said there's severance pay for political office holders. As the 8.916 trillion appropriation for 2019 awaits the assent of President Muhammadu Buhari, the proposed severance pay to outgoing members of the Senate and House of Representatives, as well as their aides, has again elicited renewed concerns about the cost of running democracy in Nigeria.
Well, the editorial has said that the budget 2019 has proposed as much as 23.67 billion as severance package for members of the National Assembly who are leaving, the outgoing ones, and also allowances for the incoming ones. And the editorial is saying that if we are to go by the Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Commission, their guidelines propose that only principal officers of the National Assembly are entitled to such severance package. And so the editorial is called raising concern about high costs or to the public coffers about severance packages. It also draws attention to legislation across several states of the country where humongous, what they describe as humongous allowances and severance packages have been proposed for governors. So much so that state governments that cannot afford and are owing several months of salary always make a priority the severance packages of the outgoing governors and political office holders. You will recall that of recent, Ekiti State appointed as many as 75 special advisors for the administration. And so the editorial is saying that the public should be concerned about the high cost of severance packages. And it indicates that it's supposed to be about 300% of the annual basic of the officers concerned.
Well, that's a point, but it is not just the legislature, as you said, it's both the executive and the legislature. They all be affected. And the problem is not that of the appointees themselves. It has to do with the law. You have to go back to the prescription by the Revenue Mobilization and Allocation Fiscal Commission. That's where you tackle it. Now, the persons who have been appointed, their tenure is running out, and of course, if they complete it without being fired, then they will be entitled to their severance package. It's statutory, just like a civil servant. If you, you know what it means. Yeah. If you are denied of your entitlement.
But you see, sorry, please, I'm not dragging this, but I want to understand, whether they're being members of National Assembly. Is it a kind of job or is it a part-time job? One wants to know, because I understand that elsewhere, being a parliamentarian is not necessarily a full-time job.
Even in the First Republic.
Yeah, so why paying us all those kind of amount of money, which is of course swelling up, the amount of money we spent in governance? That's a big question.
Yeah, very pertinent question. Over the years, the debate has always been on as to whether we should have part-time lawmakers or otherwise. But as it is, by implication, we have full-time lawmakers.
And recall what happened in Bayelsa.
I'm sorry, Kirian, what they have is a job.
Is a job?
Yeah, it's a job for a limited period of time, 4 years. Yes. All right, Kirian.
Thank you very much.
So that's where we see you again tomorrow, Bayan. Have a nice day. Yeah. Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We'll take a short break now. When we return, of course, we'll be dealing with economic matters.
Desire to improve your grammar and sharpen your pronunciation skills? If your answer is yes, then you need to attend a special 4-week course on English Grammar and Pronunciation for Broadcasters organized by NTA Television College, Jos. The course will expose participants to the nitty-gritty of English grammar and usage, which will enable them speak fluently and write as well as edit scripts flawlessly. Journalists, presenters, scriptwriters, television and radio news editors, secretaries, masters of ceremonies, and hosts of live events will find the course highly beneficial. Date, 13th May to 7th June 2019. Venue, NTA Television College, Rayfield, Jos. Course fee, 100,000 Naira per participant. Accommodation inclusive. For more inquiries, please call 0803 3144 383 or 0806 9809 807. You can also visit our website on www.ntatvc.com. NTA Television College Jos, training you to be the best you want to be.
Dial it back for a minute to the old school. Everybody love me when I do what I do, cause when I come through I got the power of cool. The power of cool.
You are watching NTA, Nigerian Television Authority. For more information and news updates, visit our website at www.nta.ng, or you can follow us on Twitter at NTA News Now, or you can like us on Facebook at NTA Network News. Stay connected on our YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/NTA News Online. Watch our live stream at www.nta.ng/live. NTA, you can't beat the rich.
All right, thank you for staying with us. And we are going straight ahead to introduce our guests who will be deliberating on our topic for today. And first we have Professor Nazif Abdullahi Dama. He's a professor of economics, University of Abuja, who is right here with us in the Abuja studio. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Kyria, and good morning, Nigeria.
And joining us is Aliu Abdullahi, a lawyer and economic analyst. It's our pleasure to welcome you today.
Thank you, Kyria. My pleasure.
All right, Kyria, we are hopefully we'll be able to get a connection to our other network centers where we are expecting two other guests to join us in this conversation. And once the uplink is there, we will introduce the guests. But let's begin with Professor Nazif Dama. Of course, you are a regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria whenever we are discussing economic matters. And here we are today, is the 7th of May, with just barely 3 weeks to the end of the first tenure of President Muhammadu Buhari. When you take a view of the economic landscape of the past 4 years, what are the high points for you?
Well, if you look at the economic landscape, as you have pointed out, there are mixed feelings. It is very encouraging for an economy that went into recession and come out of that recession swiftly, particularly if you compare what has happened or what is happening right now in Venezuela, and with a lesser population compared to ours and the economic quagmire they are in, then you can say that the government has really tried its best in that aspect. If you look at the proportionate redirection of budgetary spending, slightly in favor of capital expenditure, and with relatively more implementation, then you can say that the government has also done something relatively good. If you also look at the number of capital projects that are undertaken, particularly the railways, the roads, then you can also give the government a huge pass mark. But importantly also, the fact that the government has demystified a notorious culture that has been happening in Nigeria in such a way that when new government come in, it will just simply abandon projects and programs that are initiated. This government has completely demystified that nonsense, and it has succeeded in completing a lot of projects that it inherited from previous administration. And this is very commendable, because prior to the coming of this government, there was a mild stock taking that was undertaken, which indicates that we have spent trillions and trillions of naira on abandoned projects, and that it will cost over 5 trillion to be able to complete outstanding projects. So that one is also another landmark. Another landmark is the fact that the government has completely also demystified the so-called market-oriented economic management by introducing a lot of special intervention funds that are provided by the Central Bank of Nigeria in order to move certain sectors of the economy at extremely lower than the market-oriented interest rate, which has significantly injected resources into the economy and created mass employment for the people, and particularly the Anko Boros program in the agricultural production is also a significant point that the government has achieved so far. Another issue is the issue of some element of cost saving, particularly in the recurrent expenditure component, which is also another rallying point. And importantly also is the issue of the single treasury account. Even though I have my serious questions as to that, because significantly putting so much resources without actually using them for developmental projects to insulate the economy is not a good thing, but it is important that at any point in time, government is able to know exactly how much it is earning, and there is an element of aggregation of its resources so that it will provide a basis for better management and then less dissipation and wastage. So I think some of these highlight and the points are also very important that we look at them from a realistic perspective. Of course, I have my own reservation about some of the policies and programs, but I think realistically and objectively, these are milestones and achievement of this administration that even the greatest critic of this administration must be able to give it a pass mark.
Well, as we make progress, we might have time for you to go to those areas that you felt also touch.
Yeah.
Now let's turn to Aliyu Abdullahi. Aliyu, within the last 4 years, the current administration has actually outlined and implemented some programs, some of them, aimed at getting Nigerians out of poverty. There are other development indices, recorded within this last 4 years. So let's get your own take on what you think the government has done, especially from the positive angle.
Well, thank you, Kiran. What the government has done, you see, you have to look at, just like the Prof stated, when this government came in 2015, Nigeria was already sliding into recession. That's the truth of the matter. So we found ourselves in a recession, and the government did a number of things to actually get us out of recession. Of course, any economist will tell you one thing you would do as a monetary policy, you have to pursue an expansionary economic monetary policy, and that's what the government did. We spent our way out of the economy, out of the recession. So, and that's what you see, and that's what the Prof was referring when he said the government, for the first time, I mean in a very long while, increased the capital projects in our budgets, their first budget in 2016 to 30%, and the release was also significantly, that is the implementation was higher, and that's where you see, most of the construction workers, that were laid off when this government took off, in 2015, were actually recalled back to sites. That spurred the economy back through the multiplier effects. And then also there is what I call with the Buharinomics, is there is something for everybody. There are incentives for manufacturing. There are for actually the MSME, that is micro, small and medium enterprise, through various incentives. For example, have you seen, if you look at our growth, our GDP growth, now we are growing at 2.4% through the last quarter, the report of last quarter. And when you look what contributes to that growth significantly is the non-oil sector, which actually grown at 2.7%. Now, part of that is the manufacturing. It picked up from where it used to be in these last few years. Why? Because there were already incentives through these government's economic policies that attracted the manufacturing cycle or sector to come to life. Otherwise, before, what used to happen before this administration, we have money, more than 50% of that money is just available for people to just use for importing things, actually. Sometimes things that we can actually produce back home in the country. Now, but with the administration of President Muhammad Buhari, we have seen how those money, instead of channeling them to people that will just import things, we are actually freeing that money for sectors that can produce in the country. And we all know that an economy that produces in the country is an economy that will grow, So, and no wonder we're seeing our growth when we come out from recession from 0.7 to 1.8, now to 2.4, and we are projecting, well, the economic policymakers, they are projecting a 3% growth before the end of 2019. And don't forget also, there are also policies. We have seen drop in inflation rates consecutively for almost 17 or 18 months, minus the break we had between August to December. But now it has gone back to continuous decline. At present it is actually on 11.25%, which is really good. That means the policies are working. And for the first time also, in a very, since this government came, we have seen a reduction in the MPR. That's the interest rate, from 14% to 13.5%. What that means is more money will be freed, for people to actually borrow and invest. Investment will be spot, and then we will actually, the economy base will be spot to growth. Instead of continuous stability, we have witnessed stability. Now we want to grow the economy base. So I think, by and large, the government of President Muhammad Buhari has actually done well, despite the challenges, because when you are trying to compare an economy, you have to compare it with globally. And that's what a professor tried to do by comparing it to another economy. They actually entered recession, that is Venezuela, and we all know the story. But despite our challenges, especially with our exponential growth in population, we're able to come out and continue to grow. And I don't see this economy sliding back to recession. I can only see growth in our parts.
All right, Ali Abdullahi, thank you very much. Prof. and Leo, some persons have already argued that in making comparisons, strike out Venezuela, because Venezuela is a financial basket case, and its case, of course, was aggravated by geopolitical considerations spearheaded by the United States, which is not, of course, our situation in this particular. But the points that you have made are noted. We earlier hinted that we'll have other guests who will be joining us from our network centers. Let's welcome now. You can see the two of them right in the middle of the screen there. Okay, there was a short blip there from our Lagos Network Center. We have another regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria. That's Mr. Muda Yusuf. He's the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Mr. Muda Yusuf, pleasure to have you with us again on Good Morning Nigeria. From our Benin Network Studios, that's another familiar face, of course, is Professor Mike Obadan. Professor Obadan, a professor of economics at the University of Benin, and is also a member of the MPC, that's the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Professor Obadan, a pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Thank you very much, Kingsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, gentlemen, in the course of the past 4 years, when the economy was actually a hot item on the national agenda, we had you at various times to discuss the economy. Now, this is a question for either of you, but let's take off with Muda Yusuf. When you view the economy over the past 4 years, what do you see?
I see an economy that is still struggling to find its feet for a number of factors, some internal, some external. But let me take a cue from your guests in the studio. There are quite a number of positives that we can identify. And I just want to also endorse some of the positions that they have taken. We have seen some impact at the federal level on investments in infrastructure, particularly roads and railways, because these are very critical infrastructure to actually make the economy more productive and more competitive. Of course, I'm aware that the responsibility of providing infrastructure is not just that of the federal government. It's jointly that of the federal government and the state governments. So when we discuss these issues, we should also bear in mind that the challenge of revitalizing this economy, reviving this economy, is a collective one. When we talk from a government perspective, both the state governments, the local governments, and the federal government. Secondly, one must commend the efforts of government and its commitment to the issue of the ease of doing business. The Vice President, as the chairman of the economic team, has regularly engaged, at least in the last 4 years, the private sector on quarterly basis without fail to discuss issues of the economy and also identify what gaps there are from a private sector point of view. The ease of doing business, the PEBEC office, as the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, have also been doing quite a lot, at least to address some soft issues in the business environment. Things like business registration, things like perfection of land titles at the state level, things like the issue of passports, issues of passage at the airports. We have seen what has been done with the KAMA bill, trying to simplify processes for SMEs. We have seen quite a lot of intervention as well at the level of funding, the intervention funds, the trader money, and all of that. So there has been quite a lot that has been done. Then we have seen some fairly good level of macroeconomic stability, especially from the point of view of the exchange rate stability. At some point, we had some very disturbing situation when the exchange rate was very volatile. But in the last 1 or 2 years, we have seen some level of stability. So those are the positives, and I'm sure we'll come back to discuss what gaps there are and what are the current challenges that needs to be addressed as we progress in this discussion.
Moda Yusuf, thank you indeed. And let's turn to Professor Mike Obadan. Professor Obadan, the economy went under recession, survived the recession, stabilized, and we are told that we are maintaining or sustaining steady growth at the moment. Now, what is it for you that took place within the last 4 years in terms of economic policy and implementation by this administration?
Thank you very much. I would like to say that the economic policies that were implemented by the present government, must be understood in the proper context. And that if you take that one into cognizance, then one can easily say that the government has done very well in the area of formulating and implementing economic policies aimed at, growing the economy, diversifying the economy, and invariably improving the welfare of the Nigerian people. And you will recall that the seeds of the recession, which you mentioned, had been sowed, very strongly before the Buhari government was inaugurated in May 2015. And it was compounded by the crude oil market crash. So it was inevitable that there was going to be an economic recession. And the issue where, my concern with government at the time was that it probably should have acted more promptly by implementing the measures which were implemented later. Perhaps if they were implemented a little earlier, the story would have been a bit different. But I know President Buhari was quite sympathetic, having just assumed office, did not want to be seen as, approving of measures that could inflict hardship and pain. And so the economic policy measures that constituted policy shocks, and which triggered increase in the domestic price level, increase in the exchange rate, and so on and so forth, were inevitable. Any, serious-minded government that is enlightened with good experts would implement such measures, adjustment measures to put the economy on a straight path. And so once the recession, came calling, there was no way we could have avoided those policy measures. But happily, once the recession came and the measures were implemented, government confronted the situation frontally with appropriate monetary and fiscal measures, which aided, in moving the economy out of recession. And so you had a situation whereby, following the recession and the attendant policy measures that were implemented, we've had significant improvements, reflected largely strong macroeconomic stability, which Mr. Muda Yusufu has correctly mentioned. You observe that, right from when those policy measures were implemented to tackle the recession and all that, the inflation rate had continued to decline. It increased slightly towards the end of last year, but thereafter it has declined to about 11.31%. The exchange rate has also been largely stable, hovering around 357 to 360 naira to the dollar. So stability in exchange rate is what businessmen and women actually cherish to aid their planning. So there has been some relative stability in the exchange rate, inflation rate has gone down, and then the growth rate itself has been largely impressive, although a lot could still be done. For example, you remember in the year 2016, when the recession was really, deep, you found that the growth rate for that year was negative, minus 1.5%. In 2017, the overall average growth rate was 0.8%. And then in 2018, you found that the growth rate has improved significantly to an average of 1.93%, such that by the last quarter of 2018, the real growth rate was actually 2.38%. And such growth had been driven by expansions in production, improvements in aspects of the non-oil sector of the economy, and also macroeconomic stability. So we have a situation whereby the economy has recovered and is still recovering, and then the growth is modest. We are expecting a situation that if the measures that had succeeded so far are sustained and even intensified, then some of them reformed, then the growth prospects will likely be very, very good in 2019 and also in 2020. And you find that I want to say that I fully endorse most of the submissions of the previous speakers in the areas of the focus of government expenditure, largely on capital expenditure, public investment. You found that public investment or capital expenditure had increased in the last 3 years. And I think it was last week that reports had it in the media that the government had spent about 3.5 trillion naira in the last 3 years on capital programs and projects. And the evidence is there, as already mentioned, in the area of the infrastructure that is being developed across the country, particularly in the area of road transport network, railways, and a few others, and so on. So obviously, when we look back to the past 4 years, there have been notable accomplishments. The majorly moving the economy out of recession. We now have growth rates that we need to sustain. We also have the social investment program. Nobody has spoken about that one. That's a major reform of this government, a major policy thrust of the government aimed at helping the underprivileged, the underserved people. And it's a scheme which is very laudable, which I fully support. I know some people have criticized, aspects of it, but then there is always room for improvement. And the basic idea, the goal of the scheme is laudable and it cannot be wished away. There are other areas where the government has also done very well, particularly on the monetary side, which has been mentioned. The central bank's development focus is worth commending. Let me say that if we had a conservative central bank in Nigeria in the past 3 or 4 years, the success story we talk about would have been different. We would not have had that kind of success story. It's because of the development orientation of the central bank, why not abandoning the traditional monetary policy focus, have been very helpful. And we know the support the central bank has given to priority real sectors of the economy.
All right, Professor Michael Badon, we shall return to you as well as Mr. Muda Yusuf in our Lagos Network Center. Let's come back to the guests with us here in the Abuja studios. First, Professor Nazifi Dama. Of course, you've given up broad strokes as to what you think the economy has been through and what your rating is of the handling of the economy in the past 4 years. But specifically, before we get into the areas of challenges, some persons will raise questions as to the individual pocket feel of the policies, programs, and measures that you have articulated. So, again, what is your assessment of that? I'm referring now to the individual pocket feel. I'm sure you have a pocket there, so how much of it you feel in your pocket?
Well, there is always an element of contradiction when we economists are analyzing the performance of the economy. It is good if there is an accretion in the foreign reserve, which gives some stability to our exchange rate and which also give confidence to investors. It is logical if the Naira exchange rate is stable. It is logical if there is some element of stability in inflation or it is coming down. But the reality is, how much has every level of governmental expenditure and spending at federal and state level decisively impact on our unacceptable level of poverty and impoverishment? How much has an ordinary Nigerian on the street feel the impact of the economic development and growth that we are talking about? In what way are we able to move people out of poverty arising from our governmental policies and programs? In as much as we are spending trillions and trillions, but we are not able to make a significant dent on unemployment, our economic policies have not achieved what they are supposed to achieve. In as much as the number of millions of ordinary Nigerians that cannot afford 3 square meals per day have not been reduced significantly, our economic policies have not yet been able to achieve their objective. In as much as we have over 11 million out of school children, despite massive investment by UBEC and others, and we are not able to reduce that number, we cannot be able to say that we have achieved so much. In as much as significant number of Nigerians cannot get quality medical care despite massive investment in healthcare, then we have a lot of questions to raise. So fundamentally, the question or the most important thing that we as intellectuals and policymakers need to sit down and talk is, in what way can we be able to think out of the box, put up economic policies that actually decimate absolute poverty and reduce impoverishment so that ordinary Nigerians can really feel the impact of billions or trillions and trillions of naira being spent. Until we are able to achieve that, I think our achievement as a country is really questionable.
And yes, sir, I think Ali, you have to come in here. It's in the same matter of pocket pocket matter that Chris raised is very important. And this government, we know, of course, embarked on social investment programs, meant to touch the lives of the ordinary Nigerians. And we also know that about 13 million people have been said to be touched by this. The trader money and the likes, of course, along the way there of what the government has put in place for this important policy of government. And along the line of the same question that Kingsley raised, are Nigerians really feeling the impact of the enormous budgeting and allocations given to different strata of economic life? Of course, we know that government has also been on capital projects in this country. Constructions are going on. On the rules, race, and what have you. How are all these impacting on our people in terms of what you take home?
All right. Thank you, Kiran. You see, let me start by this. So you remember earlier I said one good thing about the Buhari's economy, is there is something for everybody, for the top, for the middle, for the lower. The lower is what he started with. That's the social investment program that this government has actually churned out. It's the biggest, in the African continent, actually, and is the most comprehensive, at least in Nigeria. And what does it do? It actually touches the life of the most vulnerable Nigerians, the poorest of the poor, through, are you talking about the Empower, which targets the graduates, unemployed graduates. It reduced about 500,000 people from the streets that could have otherwise have been unemployed. We are talking about homegrown school feeding program, which has the value chain is significant. We are talking about the women, the farmers, how many eggs in a day that these schools actually cater for the school pupils from primary 1 to primary 3. The value chain is astronomical. Then we're talking about other incentives like the trader money, farmer money, loans, soft loans. You don't need collateral. All you need is a revolving loan. You take, you repay back, and you get a double of what you were actually given earlier. All this very good. But yes, we are many. We are more than that in this country, a country of about 200 million. So how much more can that do? But at least baby steps, right? Then you talk about the issue of construction. How can that really affect Nigerians? And that is why I want to really say something. You see, there are two categories of Nigerians. There are a Nigerian, that is a Nigerian. We talk about unemployment. Yes, you go to the NBS statistics, you see the figure, maybe a projection even to rise about 32% or so unemployment rate. But have they captured also the informal sector? I don't think so. The diversification policy of this administration, if you are to aggregate or account for the number of farmers that have come on board through the Rice Anchor Borrow Funds and other schemes that are coming from Bank of Industry, CBN, and other development banks, you will see that millions of jobs have been created. That statistics are normally not captured by economists and by NBS. Now, also you have to understand, there is someone who would go and look for the little thing to do, and someone will stay at home waiting for a white collar or is it blue collar job at home. But for someone that will go, to a construction site and work, look at every state, there is a construction going on, either road or even rail. if you are working in the construction site, you are paid either daily or on weekly basis, and by the time you get paid, you will take that money, you will buy bread. The bread owner will buy flour, the flour will buy okrika, and that's how you actually support the growth in the economy, you stimulate the economy. So if you look at this, I will say, you know, those category of Nigerians that fall within all these brackets I mentioned, they are at least, you know, they are seeing something from these initiatives of government. Of course, you cannot cover everybody. Now also, we have to also talk about something. The anti-corruption policy of this administration, although it's a different something, but it is closely related to also the economic drive that we're talking about. Because when this government fights corruption, it also frees the money in the economy so that it can be used on also some of these schemes and policies, so that what you are talking, our individual people will feel the difference. And I'll tell you, I have testimony, I have seen it, you know, from a lot of Nigerians, poorest Nigerians, that could have ordered that they don't have, like Professor said, the means of eating, even some of them, even once in a day, from states in Kogi, from southwest, from the northeast, from the northwest, through the social investment programs. This conditional 5,000 cash transfer that they are giving to widows, the poorest of the poor, the most vulnerable. I've seen women use it to actually turn it to a business, grinding machine business, other forms of this thing, even poultry farming. From 5,000 that you aggregate, you are giving in 2 months 10,000. So government is doing something, but we cannot cover everybody. The government cannot cover everybody.
Ali Abdullahi, thank you very much for your comments. Let's return to Muda Yusuf in Lagos. Still on the impact of policies, programs, and measures on the individual pocket feel. Now, if you listen carefully to Ali Abdullahi, it seems to be saying that the individual pocket feel is there amongst the poorest of the poor. So, could the absence of sufficient feel of the impact be a middle-class complaint?
Yes, I don't quite agree with the last speaker, because when we talk about the impact of government or the impact of policies on the ordinary Nigerians, we should be talking from a systemic point of view. What the government has done in terms of trader money and some of these social investment programs are good. But to a large extent, they are also more of symbolic things. In terms of the real impact of government policies and actions on Nigerians, I think not much can come directly from government itself. A lot will have to come from the private sector, because we are dealing with a population estimated currently at about 200 million. How much can the government directly do to impact on people? Because the welfare of the people is related to a large extent on the level of employment or unemployment. And there's a limit to which the government can do in this space. I mean, the totality of the federal government budget is less than 10% of our GDP. That's a measure, a reflection of the impact of even the government finances on government. And we just said that about 70% of that is actually going to recurrent. So in terms of direct impact, we are talking of a very, very insignificant proportion of government revenue impacting the economy. This economy is about 130 trillion. We are talking of a budget of about 9 trillion. So we need to look beyond the issue of government. Government spending is important, but government policies that will trigger and stimulate investment at all levels of investment, either at the micro level, at the SME level, at the medium enterprise level, at the foreign direct investment level, at the domestic investment level, these things are much more important. Because it is through these platforms that you can easily touch a lot more people in terms of employment, because the welfare of the people starts essentially from the amount of jobs you're able to create. Look at the job numbers. The job numbers have been increasing, and it's becoming increasingly very disturbing. So we need to deal with critical issues of productivity in this economy. This economy is still largely dependent on the oil sector. That is a major concern for everybody. If anything happens today, there's a major drop in oil price or in oil outputs, all this stability that we celebrate, everything will come to naught. The whole thing will come crumbling. So we have to deal a lot more with the issues of diversifying this economy. This economy is still very fragile. We have recorded some growth, no doubt. But most of this growth are also driven by external factors, which you don't have much control over. So we should be looking at, the government has been doing well, but we need to look a lot more to see how we can bring in more private investments into this economy and into all sectors of the economy. Whether it's in infrastructure, in manufacturing, in agriculture, we need to put all sorts of policies on the table. Our tax policy must support this process. Our trade policy must support this process. Our monetary policy, interest rate policy must support this process. Our foreign exchange policy must support this process. And our regulatory institutions should support this process. Because the greater emphasis should be on how we mobilize a lot more investment. What we have seen in the last 1 or 2 years, a lot of our investment is going to treasury bills. It's going to federal government bonds. If you check the books of the banks, almost 70% of their investment is going into treasury bills and federal government bonds. How much impact will that have in terms of investments that will create jobs? So we should be dealing at much more, fundamental issues, because we can build a competitive economy, an economy that, can be self-sustaining, that can sustain itself outside of the oil sector.
Moda Yusuf, I would like to remain with you because I'd like you to clarify a number of issues. Aliyu was speaking from the point of view of what government has been able to do, in the direction of ensuring that Nigerians have something in their pocket. And now you are disagreeing with that, and you brought in something very important here, and that's the issue of the private sector in the entire drive. You are the DG of Lagos Chamber of Commerce, and I want to ask you, how much of manufacturing are your members doing in this country? Are they just the importers? I ask this question because one analyst did say that Nigeria does not have any international product. Not issue of beverages or perishables and what have you, but international products like telephone sets and things like that. Now, what is the manufacturing, the Chamber of Commerce, your members doing to bring in that private sector initiative that you mentioned now, because government has made it clear that that's now the ease of doing business in Nigeria, is very healthy.
The other incentives for that.
You see, the reality is that an economy gets the kind of investment that it deserves. The private sector entrepreneurs or investors will put their capital where you can get returns. I just alluded to the situation where almost 70% of the financial resources in this country is going into investment in treasury bills and federal government bonds. That's a major distortion as far as investment is concerned. And it is the incentives. I mean, if you invest in treasury bills, you get returns of about 14%, 15%. The risk is free because it's sovereign debt. There is no tax on it. Can you compare that to going into manufacturing where you have to import machineries, where you have to be grappling with the customs and the Apapa gridlock, where you have to sometimes pay interest of about 25% on the facilities that you get? So it is the environment that will determine the kind of investment. As we speak, manufacturing is contributing less than 10% of our GDP. And manufacturing products are not competitive. Earlier, there were some discussions about smuggling and all of this. These are symptoms of an environment that is not competitive. When you are producing and your cost of production is so high, look at the cost of diesel. I acknowledge that some efforts have been made in terms of power, but in terms of the
output and outcomes in the power situation, the situation is still very bad. A lot of manufacturers are still depending on either gas or depending on diesel. Diesel is about 240 naira per liter. By the time you produce with diesel and by the time you move your products across the country, the cost of transportation is still high. So there's still a whole lot of work that we need to do to scale up productivity, because if you don't have an economy that is productive and it's competitive, especially from the private sector point of view, it will be difficult to be competitive internationally, even domestically. And it will be very difficult to create an economy that is inclusive, because it is through these jobs, through the connectivity between the different regions, that is how you can build an economy that is inclusive. Imagine you have rice in Kebbi. At what cost are you going to transport it to Lagos or to Ibadan or to the east? The cost of transportation is still a big issue. So the point I'm making is that for us to have the kind of impact that we need to have, we need to create an environment that will bring down the cost of production and make production much more competitive than what it is now.
All right, Mahmoud Yusuf, thank you very much. Let's return to Professor Mike Obadan in our Benin Network studios. Prof, I mean, if you wish to speak on the issue of the impact of policies and programs, fair enough. But since we're already dealing with what would appear to be gaps and challenges in the economy, and therefore the way forward, Mahmoud Yusuf already touched on one of them. He says, look, we will need to mobilize more resources, this time from the private sector, for investment purposes. And in doing that, you must have the right mix of trade, monetary, tax, and regulatory policies in place, including interest rates, of course. What is your take on this?
Thank you very much, Kingsley. Let me say that in terms of impact, I endorse the position of the DG Lagos Chamber of Commerce to the effect that the private sector has the preponderant role in generating jobs, reducing poverty, and also making government policies to impact very positively on the majority of Nigerian people. But then we must see the social investment program as only being complementary to whatever we expect the private sector to do in terms of promoting growth in the country, generating employment, and reducing poverty. So it must not be misunderstood as if it's taking the place of the private sector. No, definitely not. I don't think the government envisaged it to be so. What the government is doing through the social investment program at the moment is having significant impact, particularly in the spheres of empowerment of small and medium enterprises, trader money, government enterprise program, and so on and so forth. The conditional transfers is also very desirable to the extent that it is focused on those families or households that do not have any source of support, either from their children or relatives, and they are just there and they need to survive. But then I agree with the position that the growth that we are pursuing at the moment is not yet inclusive, in the sense that it doesn't generate so much jobs. It doesn't reduce much poverty. And therefore, going forward, the policies must focus on how to empower small, micro, and medium enterprises to be able to step up their production activities, their business activities, expand, and then employ people. Where does government come in there? Government will come in by way of encouraging such enterprises with adequate infrastructure, particularly electricity supply. The state of electricity generation and distribution today is still, on the very low scale, low side. And many enterprises, both small, medium, and big enterprises, still rely heavily on generating sets, which then increases their cost of production, which Muda Yusuf rightly mentioned. So government must do something about that one. In the last 4 years, yes, efforts have been made, but such efforts have not yielded the desired results in terms of significant improvement in electricity. So government must bear that one in mind. Road infrastructure, rail infrastructure, that one will also have to be stepped up. What does that one imply? That public investment would have to be stepped up very, very significantly. In the area of policies, monetary, fiscal, trade policies, yes, such policies have performed fairly well in the past 4 years. I would expect that monetary policy will continue to support the objectives of growth and development in the country by way of facilitating, credit to private sector enterprises at, affordable interest rates. And I think all the central bank supported intervention programs are already doing this because they attract interest rates of less than 10%, 9%, or less. And importantly too, monetary policy must continue to support trade policy. The bank had done that one, through interventions, foreign exchange market interventions, by way of withholding access of certain enterprises from, for foreign exchange to import goods that can be produced in Nigeria.
All right, Prof, we'll just pause you there. We'll return to you, of course, if time can allow us to do that. Now, we are going to take a short break right away. When we return, we'll take other perspectives of this conversation, because I wanted Professor Dama to go into the cluster concept, which was introduced by the previous administration and sustained by this administration with respect to the issue of economic free zones, business parks, and what have you. So thank you for staying with us up to this moment on Good Morning Nigeria, your GMN. Let's take a short break now. When we come back, the program continues.
Can I see your particulars, sir?
Officer, my particulars no dey here.
In that case, you'll have to come with me to the police station.
Officer, which levels? Where I for find you something make you take arrange your weekend.
What? Offense number 1, driving without particulars. Offense number 2, trying to bribe an officer of the law.
I won't harass Nigerians or take bribe. Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
All right, Professor Dama, before we went on break, I just highlighted a number of issues we could look at. And if you also would like to make reference to the comments of our guests in Benin and Lagos with respect to the impact of the present economic system.
Yeah, certainly. Before I answer your question, I would like to comment on an aspect raised by Muda Lawal.
Muda Yusuf.
Muda Yusuf, sorry.
Muda Lawal was a footballer. He was a great midfielder.
I know. Sorry for the slip of the tongue.
No, that's all right.
Now, the reality is that for a very long period of time, this country has given so much incentive to the private sector. But unfortunately, we don't have what is called reciprocity framework of actually what the private sector is doing as a way of reciprocating for the justice done to them by the government. If you realize, before the coming of this administration, there was a lot of tax waivers given to private sector enterprises, running into hundreds of billions, with the main aim of making their products cheaper and accessible. We have not seen that. You remember there was an issue relating to the export expansion grant and the abuses that were associated with it, and most of them are perpetuated by the so-called private sector individuals. You see, the reality is that when we introduced structural adjustment program in the year 1986, precisely on 26 September, mostly we didn't have the necessary regulatory framework to be able to control and guide and direct what the private sector will do and checkmating their excesses. And then we unleash private sector orientation and market economy without the corresponding expansion in the regulatory framework. An individual in the private sector, his major objective is to make as much money as possible, irrespective of what will happen. Exactly. And then the focus of government is to make sure that it protects the individuals and make sure that the individual does not exploit disproportionately. There is no single economy in the world that is fully market oriented. When you go to the US, when you go to Europe, when you go to Japan, government intervene to make sure that things are right, because markets in themselves are left alone, have not, will not, and will never ensure optimality in resource allocation. And this is the reality. That is one.
Are you still on the same point?
Yes,
by Moda Yusuf?
Yes, on the same point. Right. Now, I have said it also times without number in our various programs. Now, if you look at the reality of our economy, there are certain fundamental things that we need to do, and we need to be honest to ourselves to be able to achieve that. The configuration of this country is made up of three types of government. It is only the federal government that is serious. What is happening at the state is beyond imagination, is below expectation, and the state and the local government significantly represent almost half of the national economy. So we need to have more collaboration at the federal level with the state governments and the local government. The usual monthly meeting of the National Economic Council that is discussing issues that are not really serious to the economy, I think we need to change that orientation. We need to have realistic discussion as to what we need to do differently in order to move this economy forward. First, the costing of capital projects at the federal, state, and local government is extremely and disproportionately unacceptable and high relative to the realities of our domestic economy. We need to sit down and talk. Are we going to continue dissipating resources in the name of capital projects that could give us much more than what we are getting? Or are we going to have realistic costing of capital projects in line with international benchmark and standards, where, for example, Nigerian Institute of Quantity Surveyors are the ones that will actually cost capital projects? And I challenge anyone to contradict me. Pick any capital project at the federal and state government level, bring a quantity surveyor, let him cost it, you'll see a cost reduction. I challenge anyone to talk differently and to challenge me for a debate on this. That is one. Number two, the way.
Number three.
Number three. Number three. Now, the way and manner we are going about with capital projects and using debt as a strategy to finance capital projects, let me say it with clear sense of national pride, is not sustainable. Other economies that have really filled up their infrastructure gap, whether in Brazil, whether in India, whether in Malaysia, they usually do it through public-private partnership, where sovereign wealth funds invest their resources into those projects, maybe on a build, operate, and transfer basis. And therefore, the inbuilt profitability is derived from the implementation of the project and its operationalization, and it leaves no debt on the economy. Our present debt profile and its insustainability, and the fact that the oil market is not sustainable, and the fact that the DMO, the Debt Management Office, have never said to people what is the total volume of contingent liability that is on this country. Because it's not just the debt of the federal government and the state government. There are debts even guaranteed for the private sector and state government by the federal government. And if they crystallize arising from economic recession, the burden is on the federal government, and nobody is talking about that. And where we are taking relatively 68 cents of every dollar we earn in order to service debt, people will just be telling you that the debt to GDP ratio is sustainable. It's not sustainable. What is the sustainability framework is to compare our debt service payment and debt profile to our earnings and income. If you have a house that is not earning rent and then you went and contract debt, how can you be able to pay the debt?
Well, Professor Nazir Vidama.
So there are fundamental issues that we need to discuss. And finally, the government need to work in such a way that it will stop listening to ministers and advisors only. The government, particularly at federal and state level, they need to have think tanks of individuals who don't hold appointment and can look at Mr. President and the governor and say, Mr. President, sir, what you are doing is wrong. We need to do something differently. Mr. Governor, what you are doing is not sustainable. We need to do something differently. Until and we have that, their political appointees will continue to tell them what they want to hear, and that is not the reality.
All right, Professor Nazir Vidama, thank you very much. You raised 4 points, but the fifth one, which you will have the opportunity of coming back to, you will be to answer the question posed by Kirian on the economic clusters, that's economic zones. We'll come to that. But why the subject is still hot? One of the questions, Kirian, one of the issues pertaining to the sustainability of using debt to finance infrastructure, we would like Professor Michael Badan to respond to that from Benin. But immediately, Mr. Muda Yusuf, I would like you to respond to at least 2 of the issues that Professor Dama raised. One is the unrequited performance, as it were, of the private sector, despite a slew of incentives by the federal government, on the basis of what you have also said, that the private sector ordinarily is a generator of jobs and economic prosperity, and yet we have a number of incentives coming to the private sector, and what we keep hearing will be the same old story.
No power.
What's your reaction?
Yes, I think the Prof has not been fair to the private sector, because just imagine where this economy will be today without the private sector. Look at practically all sectors of this economy. Look at what the likes of Dangote has done in cement and some other private enterprises. Look at what Dangote is doing in terms of the refineries. Look at what the situation is with our oil and gas sector today. Today, we are importing petroleum products to the tune of not less than $8 billion annually. And that's in addition to the challenges of subsidy, of smuggling, and all of that. These are consequences of having a public sector dominance in an economy. Part of the biggest problems we have in this economy today is the pressure on our foreign reserves, pressure on our foreign exchange market arising from importation of petroleum products. Why is it that up till today we have 4 refineries and yet we cannot refine petroleum products? These are consequences of when you put very strategic institutions in the public sector space. The public sector is not cut out to be running enterprises of that nature. The public sector is cut out to focus on social sector issues, education, health, environment, and things like that. Even in the social sector, where will this economy be today without private investment in education? Look at private schools, private primary schools, private secondary schools, private universities, and polytechnics. Look at what is the private sector doing in financial services, in aviation. Where will the country be without a private sector in aviation? Even in broadcasting, electronic media. But you see, there's a whole lot that the private sector is doing, and we need to appreciate that. I agree with you, there will be some, bad eggs in any system. And some of these things happen
because there is collusion with some unscrupulous private sector people and those in government. It's an institutional issue. If you have weak institutions, bad people will take advantage of such weak institutions. So we should be focusing more on dealing and ensuring that you have the right kind of institutions to ensure that policies achieve the right kind of outcomes. If institutions are failing, you don't put the blame on the private sector. I don't agree with that. So my feeling is that if there are people who have committed infractions, we should have the institutional framework to ensure that there are consequences. Part of the problems we have in this country is that there are no consequences, either in the private sector or in the public sector. That is why the standard of governance, the standard of a lot of things have degenerated. If you have a system that ensures that there is prompt consequences for action, we will not have the kind of problems we are having today. So that is my take. There's a whole lot that the private sector is doing. If there are infractions, let there be consequences. Nobody will be here to protect anybody that is doing anything that is untoward. But it is important that when you throw incentives at the system, we should look at the context in which the business is functioning. Look at how much incentive we are given to textile industries. For over 2 decades, we have banned importation of textiles. We are giving them 100 billion naira intervention funds. We have done all sorts of things. Yet the textile industries are still comatose. Why? It's because of the totality of the environment. So when we look at issues, we should look at it within the context in which those businesses are operating.
All right, we appreciate your comment, protecting your constituency. But we also know that when it comes to education, you mentioned education started from with a private establishment. I mean, they were owned then by missionaries and so on. And on the issue of oil, you mentioned, recall that under the OBJ administration, 7 licenses were issued to the private sector persons to establish refineries, but they never did. Right, and now Dangote is on it. You mentioned Dangote about 3 good times on what he is doing nationally and internationally. Well, you can just be him. Other people also enjoyed certain incentives that were never, gone fine, the way he did, because as the people put their money, where are going to get the benefits almost immediately. Nobody wants to venture into manufacturing, which has a lot of processes, that are required before you begin to make your gains. So that's part of the problem, from what we have appreciated, in a couple of decades now in this country. Now, let our man Michael Baden, Professor Baden, please briefly too on the issue of debt of financing projects in Nigeria. You can speak to that.
Thank you very much, Kirian. Let me say that in principle, there is no problem in using loans or debt to finance infrastructure. I think the problem in the past had been that monies borrowed and allegedly meant to finance infrastructure or other projects, had been mismanaged or diverted, or spent on consumption. And if we have to borrow to finance projects, then we must comply with certain cardinal principles of debt management. For example, we will need to deploy such borrowed funds to projects that can aid the productivity of the economy or the other sectors. Productivity increases, they're able to earn more money, revenue, and then the loan can be repaid through increased taxes. Or the projects themselves can generate funds which can be used in repaying the principal and then interest payments. But more often than not, this is not done. And in the case of external borrowing, we also expect a situation whereby the borrowed funds from abroad that will need to be repaid in foreign currency, not naira, must be deployed to projects that can increase export of goods and services and export earnings, or reduce the importation, of goods and services. Once this is the case, we can easily borrow either within the country or outside the country to finance, various projects. But let me also add that one thing that we must, look forward to doing, in the future is that once we borrow money, either within the country or outside, we should deploy them to targeted projects that can generate revenue. For example, road network. Deploy them to certain highways on which tolls can be imposed. So the tolls.
All right, Professor Obadan, sorry we're having to jump in there. We're getting now really pressed for time. Let's bring in very quickly Aliyu Abdullahi again. There are a number of matters on the table, but very succinctly. So, Professor Dama also referenced it, and indeed the other speakers, to some extent. How can we, as a people, as a nation, ensure that we also bring in the subnational entities into the economic growth prospects that we are yearning for? A number of state governments, are pulling their weight, but if we were to take the average, they would appear to be more who are just saying, oh, we are a civil service state. You come to Abuja, get your allocation, you go back, you pay salaries, and then everybody is, the governor has done very well, it's an emperor, local government chairman is an emperor in his own small right. And at the end of the day, the jobless numbers that we are talking about out of school children, they come from the local governments, they come from the states. So how do we as citizens of the nation get the subnational entities to be more active in terms of formulating policies, taking directives, taking direction, as it were, from what is happening at the national level?
Well, though you say succinctly, you see, it has to start from actually the election cycle. Unfortunately, that's where you have to either get it right or wrong. You have to actually get the right leaders who have focused vision, who can actually think how to, because each state is an economy in itself. You have to look at what is their own competitive and comparative advantage, as a state. What will work, for example, for a Lagos state will not work for a Kano state or a Zamfara state. And what will work for Kaduna or Niger cannot work for Lagos. Lagos has no lands, so they can't actually concentrate on agri. But what do they have? They have water, so they have limited space, but they improve and they increase their tax base and collection and all these policies towards that. But when you come, for example, to far north, what do we have in far north? We have the land and we have the population. So what did I tell you? In factors, in basic economic factors of production, it means you can actually get your policies, economic policies toward farming and things like that. And almost all the states have natural resources, in them, which we don't actually explore the right way. We don't have the policies or the regulations to do that. But by and large, the things that you need really to do, the leaders have to know what to do. Tap in your competitive and comparative advantage as a state.
Ali, we have to really stop you here. Gentlemen, it's been a very, very interesting conversation this morning. We have a large population, fast-growing middle class, and what have you. And it was said that about 65 million Nigerians are economically active, but perhaps we have some spatial fragmentation because of lack of cohesiveness in doing all of that, which of course Professor Dama actually said earlier. Now let's go to the tweets now. Some persons have been making contributions to the conversation. Law Alpha C. The recurrent expenditure of all levels of government is on the high side. The federal government should exercise the political will to drastically reduce the cost of governance, particularly at the National Assembly.
Now, Benjamin Unze tweets, the soul of sustaining economic development of Nigeria is the provision of jobs that will increase also productivity, lower cost of living, increased standard of living, and all of which, of course, will lead to savings and investment and reduction in crimes.
Ibatibi Zekeri, power sector is very key to the nation's development. The next level agenda should be focused on fixing the power as it helps to create jobs.
Now, Moses Achigbe tweets, economic growth is usually via SMEs. Now, how have the SMEs fared in recent years? Economic growth in Edo State is an example the federal should emulate, from a solely civil service state to an emerging economic hub.
Francis, more private sector or private investment and ease of doing business should be encouraged. Private sectors, they are one of the major economic drivers and the large employers of labor.
Now, Akeju Olagbaju tweets, now to a large extent, Buharinomics has worked with inflation low and exchange rate is stable. Yes, the impact may not have permeated, but the states also need to align their economic development policies to complement the federal so as to increase growth.
Jermaine Martins, anytime I analyze the economic policies of this administration, my hope as a Nigerian is restored. Villagers now have something handy to say Nigeria is moving forward. I'm an unemployed graduate, but my confidence has no limit that I shall fit in before this administration elapses.
Shakiru tweets, it's good that everybody is commending the government for the improvement in the economy, but where are the experts for security in the country that will save the economy for a much longer time?
Zakari once more said the guest is talking about what are the plan for them, the beneficiaries. We all know the program is on 2 years basis. So will there be laid off to go back to the street again?
All right, Kirian, I think those are the tweets that we can take. We'd like to thank all those, who sent in their tweets. And just, another polite reminder, a tweet, make it short, not more than 2 short sentences. And we have the opportunity of reading those tweets. One of those last tweets was talking just now about security. And we see what is happening in the Northwest and the response of the security agencies, what impact that might have on economic growth later on in the year. Of course, we'll begin to see the numbers. It's on that note, we'd like to thank all our 4 guests who've been with us. It's been a very interesting conversation from our Lagos Network Studios. Muda Yusuf, Director General of Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Always a delight having you on Good Morning Nigeria. Thank you for being with us. Professor Mike Obadan, Professor of Economics and member of the Central Bank Monetary Policy Committee. Pleasure having you once again. You joined us from our Benin Network Studios. Thanks a lot for being around. And here in the Abuja Studios, Aliyu Abdullahi, lawyer and economic policy analyst. Thanks a lot for being around with us.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Professor Nazif Dama, Professor of Economics, University of Abuja. Delight having you on Good Morning Nigeria. Unfortunately, the 5th item responding to the cluster issue, we're unable to take it, but that's a matter with KIV.
And we need to host him and Yusuf.
Yusuf, that's right.
On the private sector.
That's right. So gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for being with us. Of course, we will have sports, we have entertainment, we have those on other programs. Today is another big action day in European Champions League. Liverpool, they have a mountain to climb. It's on that note, we'd like to thank you for tuning in to Good Morning Nigeria today. We are back tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. My name is Kingsley Osadolo.
And I am Kirian Uma. It's been a pleasure having you this morning. Well, we'll see you again tomorrow.